If you've been on the internet at all in the last, say, 2 years, then you're undoubtedly aware as far as the absolute circus that has evolved out of the controversy over trans individuals being allowed into women's spaces and into women's sports. One of the more principal individuals that's involved in this conflict our society is wrestling with is a woman named Riley Gaines. And the only reason I'm bringing up her in regards to, aside from her relevance to this topic, is some of the comments that she has explicitly made. Because she will often talk about how just kind of acclimated a young woman needs to be with being vulnerable and being exposed in those specific spaces relevant to her competition, the locker room spaces and the changing room spaces of women's sports, due to quote her directly, that her competition swimsuits would be paper thin and skin tight, and as a result, there's just not a lot left to the imagination, both while she's wearing it and then in the process of putting it on. And I think in many ways this is relevant to something I've talked about in the past of, you know what, maybe that is actually closer to the root of this problem. That at the very least in this specific sphere of women's sports, the concept of modesty, moderation, limits has very much so given way, just yielded overall to the concept of convenience and I guess the hope, I guess, of gaining some sort of competitive edge. To which someone might reply to me, well, what are you expecting to happen? That they're going to wear a burqa or some sort of nun's habit under the water? Do you realize how much drag that's going to create? You realize how limiting in physical motion something of that nature would be? And actually, that's exactly what I am talking about, of that modesty is over here, and it's really not even a matter of consideration in regards to really, I'd say, most competitions of any kind that involve a woman, whether that's women's dance, women's cheerleading, women's, like, they will throw out the word modesty when comparing certain things, but the reality is that there's been a point of controversy in women's athletics, women's competition, regarding the things that in some ways they are forced to wear. Now, I'm aware, of course, that the World Olympic Committee happens to allow a broad spectrum of things allowed for different people to compete in, and that often it's really a matter of the individual national committees that make those decisions. And so yeah, the athletes don't have as much autonomy as someone who's speaking in this realm might think that they do, but they do have some. But where I'm getting at is the idea of modesty is a Christian value. I don't know if you know that. It's an exclusively Christian value. In fact, when the Olympics were first invented by the ancient Greeks, the competitors, both male and female, would compete completely naked. And that the word gymnasium that we use for the place where people play basketball and other forms of interior sports comes from the Greek place where they would have and hold these competitions and training events, but it doesn't mean open athletic environment. It meant the place to be naked. It meant that they had a cultural value of modesty outside in the culture, and that there was this cordoned off space in which, when there was competition to be held, that they would sacrifice that value of modesty, which was not much compared to what we would consider modesty anyway, and that the assumption was that if you wanted to compete, you were going to be completely exposed in the process. And it would appear we are not far from adopting that same standard ourselves. I would be willing to bet that within the next 50 years, probably less than that, probably like 25 years, you're going to have the first athletes in the Olympics themselves citing what I just said as evidence that they should be allowed to compete completely naked in whatever their event happens to be. And the culture is almost certainly going to capitulate. The only thing that I can think of that would intervene, that would prevent that, would be, where would you put the sponsor icons on the person? Because, of course, money, the dollar is king. And so what are they going to do? Body paint? Is that what's going to happen? Or is it just that's going to be the primary thing that prevents an athlete from doing that now, not any cultural values of modesty or decency or prevention of obscenity in front of the eyes of young athletes that are impressionable, or just young spectators that are there to see the best of the best compete at the best of the best events, but instead something else. And where I'm really getting at here is the matter of how should Christians conduct themselves in a world that is increasingly secularizing, and with secularization shedding inherently Christian values like modesty, like decency, like things of this nature. Where should a Christian draw these lines? Because coming from my youth pastor and youth ministry background, I've had these conversations in limited ways with parents, but the reality is that for the most part, they're not thinking about these things. And because they're not thinking about these things as values, they inherently secede authority and power in their own family lives to the coaches and to the trainers and to the decision makers and the administrators in those spaces without much contest. And I can't even tell you how many families I've seen more or less kind of ripped apart by the differing demands of all of their different kids and all of their different coaches and all of their different sporting venues that they want to participate in, so that as soon as a kid is able to drive, they're immediately thrust through that rite of passage by necessity so that they can take themselves and maybe even a few of their compatriots to their own events on their own, unsupervised, while the other two parents are split across God's green earth in other spaces for their other siblings, with families rarely, if ever, even sitting down together on a regular basis. Rarely, if ever, even in the same zip code with one another, because of the fact that they all have different obligations to different teams, to different competitions, to different things, and they'll justify it, no doubt about it. Well, I want my kid to have the best possible future. I want my kid to learn sportsmanship, teamsmanship, sacrifice. I want them to be physically healthy and fit. I want them to be able to get scholarships and grants in the future. I want them to do these things. And those are admirable values, potentially. However, is it worth ransoming the integrity of your family unit in order to acquire them? And then also the individual erosion of values in each individual child, as they are in full circle here, to quote Riley Gaines again, that they're forced to acclimate themselves to being extraordinarily exposed and vulnerable, wearing clothing that is leaving very little to the imagination, quoting her again, in public, being sensualized and sexualized by the marketing and the online social media venues of competition. Is that acceptable? Is that something that should be allowed and normalized? Or is this something that Christians really should push back against? And so, introducing once again the receive, reject, redeem trilateral analysis for this, is it possible for Christians to just receive all forms of sports, all forms of competition, dance, cheerleading, tumbling, all these different things with everything that comes along with them without question? And I think that as we are here now, I think that the evidence for that is clearly no. That just this receive matrix that most Christians have subjected themselves to, that have subjected their families to, has left them very vulnerable, very dangerously vulnerable to exploitation, to being mishandled inappropriately, and especially with this invasion of their private spaces, that there probably is no real way to do these things in a safe way in which young girls are actually going to be protected going forward, because a lot of these things are Pandora's box. I don't think there is a way to get them back shut again. So what's next? And for parents to just look the other way and hope things go well is incredibly naive in my mind. What about redeem? How much of these things can we allow their influence, allow into our lives, and us hope to be able to redeem it for a Christian purpose? And I have met and talked with different parents that have seen this as a missional opportunity, that as their kids travel on a softball traveling team, that they have the opportunity to model Christian values in front of their teammates or coaches. And that is an interesting ideal for someone. That's an interesting postulate, I suppose, but for the most part, it doesn't walk itself out. I don't know, I've lost count of the number of kids that have, well, they're going to go off to college and they're going to be a light on that campus, and then they come back for Christmas break or winter break for the first time and they're a Marxist lesbian. These influences on impressionable kids are incredibly potent. Peer pressure, and it's incredibly powerful. And it is, I think, negligent, maybe irresponsible at the most, of parents to put that kind of responsibility on a kid who probably isn't ready for it. No matter what they've said, whether they've been baptized or not, they're probably not actually ready for that kind of experience yet. And they cave a lot to it. Not every single time, no, but they cave to it a lot. They end up yielding to it. And even in the instance where they do have some positive influence on their larger friend groups, their competition groups, even in those instances, the compromises that they make along the way to earning the influence that accomplish that is usually pretty devastating. And it ends up that they are at best lukewarm, and at worst it ends up being like more 50-50 of that their values have eroded at the same level that they've kind of lifted the common denominator of values among their group. It's also notable as far as competitions level of the schools, that they're actual, like the Christian and the Jewish parochial schools and things, that they want to be able to have athletes that compete in these realms of swim, of dance, of cheer, of things of that nature. And a part and parcel of that in our culture, unfortunately, is that if you have girls volleyball or girls softball, you're inevitably going to have people in the stands that are, look at the Gams on number 32. as a youth minister, I'd sit in the stands and I would watch competitions of every kind, and I would overhear it. And it's just, you're talking about middle-aged bearded men drinking beer and sexualizing teenagers. And there's plenty of it online as well. Huffington Post articles of who has the best bulge in the men's downhill luge, or the who has the best track and field what do you want to say, uniforms among women, and just there is no end of it. And so if you want to be competitive, it's usually the most competitive teams and athletes that set the standard for that. And so if you want to be modest in the swimming pool, you are not going to be at an advantage to the ones that are competitive, and that means you're going to lose a lot. And people don't like to lose. Donors don't like to see athletes with their school's insignia lose, come in last maybe even. They don't want that. They don't want to gain a reputation for that. And so even if you do try to draw a line that we're prioritizing modesty and dignity of our athletes over their competitive edge, eventually that value is going to erode to the ones that want to see their kids win instead. I'm just telling you the truth. So what about reject? What about those of, I want nothing to do with this. My kid is never going to be in the hypersexual environment of competitive urban dance, of ballet, which is very sexual, figure skating, which is very sensual, of swim, of track and field. I competed in track and field, and I can tell you that the female competitors that were on my team, they used to complain all of the time about how open their uniforms were, how revealing they happened to have been. And they've only gotten worse since then. And so should Christians just say, no, just absolutely not, and just withdraw their kids from competition, no longer coach, no longer volunteer, no longer attend the venues where those competitions are taking place? And where's the line on that of, what about with NFL cheerleaders? Am I no longer going to watch the NFL because 30 of 32 teams have cheerleaders? Is that what I'm going to do? Or, and where's the line as far as collegiate competition? Where's the line of what is and isn't? Do I say no to sports overall because beer commercials often involve women in bikinis? Do I say no to everything? No more streaming services. I'm just going to watch Angel Studios on their app instead. Because obviously I'm on a track, and I did that kind of exaggeratively, hyperbolically, of that if you do that, you draw Christians from every facet of society, eventually you have something of a parallel community that doesn't interact with the world all that much, which makes missional living impossible. You can't live on mission for Christ if you're not interacting with the people that he came to save. And that sooner or later, it won't take very long, but it won't take, in which Christians are going to have a subset community, kind of like how the Amish are, the Mennonites are now, of that they're out there. You might pass them on the highway with their horse and buggy, but you really don't see them very often. You know that they build really good roofs, and if you need a new roof and shingles, then you might contact them by some means, send them a smoke signal or something. But for the most part, you don't think about them. You're not concerned about them. You don't see them. You don't interact with them. And as a result, you just assume they're doing what they want to do. You don't really consider even the option of adopting their lifestyle and values whatsoever. In fact, I'd say most people consider it as a derisive thing to say, what are you going to do? Go be Amish? What are you going to do? Go be Amish? And the answer is no. Most people are not going to do that. And so there is a reasonable question. How far is too far? It's the kind of bearded man fallacy, which if you've never heard of, you've got clean shaven, no beard. Well, you put one hair on a person's face, is that a beard? No. 2 hairs? No. 10, 35? At some point, the person's going to have a beard, but it's not clear where it was and wasn't. And so some would say, well, there's no beard. No one has a beard because we don't know where the threshold of beard and non-beard happens to be, and that's nonsense. The question is, for every family, where do you draw the line? And the reality is that where you draw the line is it needs to be on the basis of values, not on the basis of convenience. And it means for a lot of people that they're going to have to make some really aggressive changes, because you do technically make decisions on the basis of value, of conviction, rather than convenience. The problem is that convenience is a value. It's one of the primary values of our capitalist environment, QVC, quality, value, convenience. And we think that because this is the shortest path to a college degree, that they're willing to ransom their kids' modesty, dignity, in order for them to acquire that. And I think that a lot of Christians really need to reassess that decision alone. That first, a college degree isn't what it used to be worth, but additionally, that dignity is something that is very difficult to win back when you've given it away, in the same way that character is. Just ask all of these women during 2020 when they weren't able to go to work to support their families. A lot of them they created a OnlyFans, hoping that if they sold pictures of themselves intimately online, then they would be able to support their families. And first of all, the first thing they found out is no, they can't. It's very difficult to make money at that. And then additionally, the consequence of the adult men in their very lives knowing those intimate details about themselves is something that you can't put a lid back on. And it has caused enormous amounts of humiliation for those women that you can't close Pandora's box. And some of them, they've had to move, completely rearrange their lives, and the thing is, even though they did that, it still followed them. It was only a matter of time before their kids' classmates, that there are nurses, there are teachers that tried to do these things as a side hustle, that their administrators found out. And it's not the worst case scenario that some of them were fired as a result. Some of them were exploited as a result, that they were blackmailed as a result. I'm going to tell your husband, or I'm going to tell your boyfriend, or I'm going to tell your kid about this here in school if you don't do these things for me. And they inevitably do. Ask all the women that have tried to pivot their OnlyFans career into other things, whether that's because they had a spiritual experience like a Nala Ray or a Kat Von D, or if that's just they thought they made the splash that they were hoping to. Most of them didn't, but they made the splash they were hoping to, made the money they were hoping to. Most of them didn't, but some did. And now they want to go and they want to take that money and do something else with it. And they can't. Because to the culture at large, for better or worse, whether or not they should be viewed this way, it is what it is. They view him as just another online skank. It's just the truth of the matter, and that she's for the streets, that she's untrustworthy, that there's all sorts of things that go along with it. And you can say, well, it shouldn't be that way. Maybe it shouldn't. I don't know. But the reality is that dignity doesn't sprout out of a hole in the ground, is what I'm telling you. It has to be cultivated over a long period of time. But it can be sacrificed in a minute. It can be lost in a second. And with our kids, that's a very high price to pay for the hope that a kid is going to eventually go to college, and we don't even know if they want to or will want to, or whether it'll be worth it. So think about it more, is what I'm telling you. Think about it more deeply than that.